Good morning. Thank you for joining us for today's coffee talk. My name is Sean O'Brien, president of Quick Rate, and as always, I'm pleased to be joined by Steve Huntington. Steve, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us for our next monthly or bi-monthly or semi-monthly coffee talk. And my name is Steve Huntington. I'm the director of analytics here at QuickRate, and spent about the better half of my career working with Sean for all different types of analysis for community financial institutions across the country.
Thank you, Steve. Just a reminder, we will send out a link to today's recording along with a copy of the slides, so that will likely be in your inbox Monday afternoon. Also, throughout the presentation today, please submit any questions you have either through the Q&A box or the chat feature. We'll monitor those and interject them into the conversation in the midst of the discussion, or certainly by the end of the discussion. As always, we will go ahead and well, get me to stop here and say, again, I think one of the things we're going to focus on today is, again, there's an evolution to the reserve process. We've tried to be attentive to not only the needs you have in trying to prepare the analysis, but what we're also hearing industry-wide from other credit unions, and be able to kind of incorporate that and share that. And if we can build tools or aids to assist you, that's really what we're trying to do. So we'll talk about a few things we're hearing today, and as a result, things we're trying to do to address that. As always, we'll start with a few polling questions. So certainly appreciate your participation in these, if you would. Just a few questions. The first one is regarding this one's probably just around your loan portfolio. Did your loan portfolio increase or decrease in Q1? I guess the third option, I always forget to say, is stayed the same. Okay. Go ahead and end that one. Share the results. So 50% of you saw an increase in your loan portfolio, 24% a decrease, and 26 stayed about the same. So thank you for participating on that one. Next question is regarding past due loans. Did you see any increase in your past due loans in Q1? Again, just a simple yes or no. Okay. All right. So 63% of you did see an increase in your past due loans. 37% of you did not. Next up, just kind of a follow-up around charge-offs. Did you charge off any loans in Q1? Okay. 89% of you did, 11% of you did not. And then the final one is really just if you use any kind of forward-looking economic factor index, as a predictive measure. We just kind of had a question from one of our clients just about if anybody was using anything like this, and if they were, what they were using. So again, if you do answer yes, if you wouldn't mind sharing what you look at, we just thought, again, this might be something helpful to share with the broader audience. Okay, so most of you are not. And so again, appreciate everybody participating in the questions today. Again, we'll make those part of the follow-up email as well. So again, again, as I touched on, we try to where we can improve the tool, recognizing we never want to do anything to change the way the tool is calculated. But if there's things that we can do to give you better context, help better understand, be able to give more information to provide, support to regulators or auditors, those are the things that we're kind of continually focused on. And again, I think just reminder, they're always optional. They're never required. But just trying to improve the tool as best we can as we move forward. So, Steve, if you want to touch on any of these.
Yeah, well, most of these are things that we have discussed previously or are already been live on the tool for a number of months. But you'll notice the last bullet point there on the screen is something we've been thinking about and working on for a little while and wanted to. We won't be demoing it today, but it'll be something that you'll have available relatively soon. And it's a direct result of lots and lots of feedback from examiners and auditors and users. Whereas, while we were initially developing the CECLSolver tool in conjunction with the NCUA and other regulatory bodies, our methodology for the unfunded commitments was relatively straightforward to begin with. However, there's a lot of subjectivity, especially in one of the lesser known areas of accounting when it comes to unfunded commitments. And so we found with some auditors and examiners, we've had some friction and some questions about assumptions built into unfunded commitment methodologies and so on. So we thought it might be an opportunity to offer an additional methodology, which is not a different way of calculating it, but a more streamlined, even more simplified. So there's kind of less assumptions built in, and it's a very straightforward, simplified way of calculating the unfunded commitments. And we thought that might sort of grease the wheels if you had a particular examiner or auditor that now that they're sharpening the point, right? A lot of you are in your at least your second exam cycle since the implementation of CECL. And in that first exam cycle, everyone was sort of just checking the boxes. So, have you made a good faith effort to consider reserves with the new methodology and consider unfunded commitments as part of that? And as long as you had been looking into it or making an effort, you got the checkbox and they moved on. And we're seeing in this next round of exams and audits that they have more questions, they have more opinions of how they think things should be done, and want to see more defense and justification for the way that you've chosen and the assumptions that you've made. So anywhere where we can simplify the process and make it more straightforward and even more simplified, we're always looking for ways to do that. And so you'll have another, it'll be relatively self-explanatory once it's live on there. I'm sure I'll be demoing it in the next coffee talk, but just an even more straightforward way or simplified way to calculate the unfunded commitment.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. All right. Again, just a reminder, always optional, always optional. So again, just a reminder on some of the things that are available to you today. Steve, you want to go ahead and take this one?
Yeah, we pointed this out on the last coffee talk. The Fed has updated their stress testing economic projections in their the annual report that they put together. They updated in February of every year. It's got some of those kind of large scale national economic trends when they get together a bunch of their economists and do 3 years worth of forward-looking quarterly projections in a perfectly apples to apples way with 20 years of historical quarterly data on a handful of these economic trends. And I know a lot of our users are already utilizing these particular trends as justification for or defense of Q factor adjustments. And it's great data to do that because it goes so far back in history on a comparable way, and it's quarterly, moving 3 years into the future. The historical data you can see there, you can scroll to the left and go all the way back to the year 2000, I believe. And the baseline scenario are the actual projections from the economists, sort of the midpoint or median projection. And the severely adverse scenario is a hypothetical scenario, not a projection point that just shows their assumptions about what it might look like if it were to be severely adverse or about as bad as it could get. So it gives you kind of a range of assumptions from actual expected quarterly growth to worst case scenario with an economic downturn. And I don't know if any of you were thinking about or using some of these on the polling questions at the beginning. I didn't want to foreshadow too much, but we think these are great ones to use if you're looking for something to use. And of course, you can always print off or PDF or export this data into Excel and do anything else that you find helpful with it as well.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Oh.
Next up, just the organization and management tool. Again, this was something that, just 3 years into utilizing the tool, many of you had multiple scenarios, and certainly we got requests on if there was something we could do to help you better manage those. Steve, take it away.
Yeah, that's not coming soon. Sorry about that. That's it's been live for a while now. If you've run a scenario in the last quarter, you've probably already seen this. This is a direct result of a lot of feedback from our users that we've had users on the system for over 3 years now. And they've accumulated a good number of scenarios, either on a quarterly basis or even on a monthly basis. And that list of existing scenarios was starting to get kind of unwieldy without additional organization. And so this was our attempt to make it a lot more user friendly. So now you can see your scenarios in chronological order and expand each year. So you don't have one long drop down list. You could also see, who's created them, when they were created, when they were last updated, and by whom, and manage them in a more efficient and straightforward manner. So anything that if your experience using this is not as we'd hoped, or there's anything you think it's lacking or could benefit from adding in, we would love to hear that. We always would love to hear that feedback, because these types of additions are a direct result of you guys sharing that information with us. So don't be shy.
All right, perfect. Again, kind of following in line, and Steve's touched on this previously, right? We, now that we are 3 years in and we've got, over 500 credit unions using this, we're generating a lot of data. Steve, do you want to talk to this?
Yeah, and I know I point this out each time, but it's data that we're not doing it just to toot our own horn. We get lots of requests from auditors to ask how robust our data set is, because when you're using this type of data, especially proprietary data that's not out there publicly available, and it's to help justify your WARMs at the segment level, or your Q factors, or have comparable reserve levels at the segment level, at the loan segment level, what data set you're using and how robust that is the most important question. So we'll continue updating this whenever we do a coffee talk, and so you have an idea of exactly. There's over 500 different unique credit unions that are actively running scenarios on our tool on a quarterly basis, from 47 different states, from credit unions under 10 million in assets all the way up to a $9 billion in total assets. Average credit union size is about 300 million, and they've run, you guys collectively have run thousands and thousands of scenarios, so that when you want to see what direction your peers' Q factors for one particular segment are headed in, to compare with the direction that UCQ factors headed in, you'll know that that data you're comparing it to is a quite robust set of similar sized credit unions to yourself.
Next up are prepayment speeds. So this is a question we get a lot, more so from auditors, questioning or just inquiring around why, do we use the NCUA, provided prepayment speeds in our WARM calculation. And again, the guidance calls for a prepayment assumption that is reasonable and supportable. Our position was something from the NCUA certainly meets that standard. And secondly, there was a materiality and time component to this that we didn't think the time necessary for each individual credit union to calculate their own prepayment speed was worth the time and effort in the difference that it's going to make. And so I think these are very reasonable and supportable prepayment assumptions. They, really strike the tone that we talked about early, precision versus accuracy. A slight difference in a prepayment speed might not be 100% precise, but it's certainly directionally accurate. and materially accurate. And so Steve's going to talk a little bit about how that kind of, folds into our warm calculation.
Yeah, I mean, our the prepayment speed, we get asked frequently. So, why are you guys using an industry prepayment speed and not calculating it? Or why, or our users might be asked that from an auditor, and it's really just not. You're not going to get much bang for your buck by going and doing an entire loan level prepayment study on your own data. It takes long enough to do a warm calculation from all the loan data. Getting an accurate prepayment calculation or estimate is even more challenging, because not only are you looking at loan level data for each individual note, but you have to take into consideration vintage and the age of the different loans on the books, and slice and dice them, not just by segment, but also by vintage and everything else. So it can be a very complicated, time consuming, and potentially costly analysis to do. And it really doesn't make a huge impact on the warm calculation unless you have a huge change in prepayment estimates. And so, especially with, I think that's one of the reasons why the NCUA decided to take it upon themselves at significant expense, by the way, to calculate these prepayment rate, industry-based prepayment things, and share them with credit unions around the country to begin with. They hired a third-party statistical firm to go out, collect a bunch of loan level data and industry data, and calculate these prepayment rates by segment from the exact same segments on your call report that we use for our CECLSolver. So a very, very apples to apples comparison. And it's pretty much the only thing that is out there publicly available that provides this data at all, much less on a on a segment to segment basis. And the data that we had before the NCUA came out with this was, if you go to the next slide, Sean, some of our oldest customers, longest customers will remember this. And it was the FHFA publishes a quarterly prepayment monitoring report. And this was really the only resource that we had available to share with users up until about 3 years ago or so, or 2.5 years ago, when the NCUA started providing their own more accurate or more comparable data. This is a good piece of data to use, or at least a secondary piece to compare either your own prepayment calculations or the NCUA's prepayment calculations, but it's only for mortgage loans. So other loan types, there really wasn't any good. There still isn't any good publicly available data on prepayment rates. But for mortgages, again, this is sort of a industry-wide, so all the Fannie and Freddie mortgages in the entire country. This is going to be heavily weighted towards large national, international banks, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, but it includes the entire industry. But the NCUA data, again, was focused on smaller credit unions from around the country and doing it at the segment level. So much more precise, accurate, and focused on your specific peers. It is good to notice, of note, I guess, at least to notice that these numbers also happen to fall in line with what the NCUA study has shown. You'll see over the last, since the crazy prepayment rates we were seeing back in, 2020 and 2021, over the last couple of years, it's kind of settled down into somewhere between a 5 and 10% annual or annualized prepayment rate for mortgage-related loans. So if you head back to the last slide, you'll notice if we want to compare data sources, well, the NCUA data is coming up right now with 8.2%. So row 9 there, residential first lien loans, mortgages. The annual prepayment rate estimate from the NCUA data is 8.2%, right smack dab in the middle of where the data from the FHFA is coming in, which gives us even more credence. And just to kind of prove Sean's point that, getting too specific with this and spending too much additional time and energy and money trying to sharpen that point. Well, is it 8.2% or is it 8.1 or is it 7.9? Let me go ahead and share my screen and show you guys what impact those types of changes in prepayment rates would have on warm calculations on average. Go ahead and share here.
And
so
Steve, while we got a question coming, and I don't
Sure.
know, I don't know the answer to this. how are they determining the age of a portfolio to determine the prepayment speeds of the NCUA?
It's a mix. So it's not, they're taking large pools of small credit union individual loans at the segment level at all different points of maturity in order to get like a pretty much an average prepayment rate, right? So that'll include, obviously, prepayment rates on less mature portfolios might be a little bit higher, and on more mature portfolios might be a little bit lower, but on average for the credit unions that they pulled the loan data from, that's where it comes out. But again, if you were to compare yourself to that and try to make an adjustment, you would have to start getting into pretty good detail as to what's the average age of the loans on your books versus the other loan. And a lot of that data, none of that data is publicly available either. So you're already getting into a sticky wicket of detailed non-public loan level information to try to take that industry resource and modify it even for your own data. It could be done, but it almost opens up more doors. It begs more questions than it answers, right? So here we've got if you guys recognize this is our warm estimator tool. And this is just kind of a summary of that. And in there we have the NCUA's data. So again, for the first quarter for the mortgage loans, 8.2% prepayment rate. So if I click on, this is just some sample data. So this data is not, completely is not real loan data. But just to give you an example, let's say that you had calculated a WARM of 1.9 years on a particular segment of your portfolio using an 8.2% prepayment rate. If you just change the prepayment rate estimate from 8.2 years to, let's say 8.2% to 6%, you'd go from if we were using the portfolio level amortization adjustment method, goes from 1.9 year WARM to a whopping 1.95 years. The difference in your reserve calculation from using a 1.9 year WARM to using a 1.95 year WARM is almost definitely negligible and quite possibly 0.00. What I mean by that is, again, we're using, the WARMs are used to look back in history and calculate and aggregate losses over a historical, let's say 1.95 years, and then assume that your losses over the next 1.95 years are going to be similar to that, except for, Q factor adjustments, right? And if most of you look back a couple years in your portfolio, you're probably not going to see gigantic, if you're like most credit unions, gigantic loss levels. And so changing it from 190 to 195 as far as a WARM is concerned is not going to make very much of a difference at all, if any. And I just took that prepayment rate and changed it from 8 to 6. If I take it up to 12, let's say it's double the prepayment rate, and I was way off. You've gone from 1.9 year WARM to a whopping 1.8 year WARM, which is still, in most cases, not going to amount to a material or in colloquial terms, a hill of beans of difference. And so while it is an assumption that is part of the WARM, and the WARM is an important assumption or calculation in reserve accounting, small changes or even medium changes in prepayments, all things being equal, is not going to make a very significant difference in the reserve. So if you're using industry data and you're asked to why you're using that as opposed to your own data, well, it's because the juice is not worth the squeeze. It's not an easy process. It is a long and drawn out and can be expensive if you outsource it. And even if it leads to a significantly different number, which is unlikely, it's unlikely to result in any significant change in reserve.
Yeah, and I think that's really the punchline, right? Is we just again, the juice is just not worth the squeeze. So anyway, that's a question we've seen from auditors, so we wanted to just kind of refresh on why we've done what we've done to this point. All right, let me get this presentation back up here. Okay.
And having two completely separate and independent and unrelated sources coming to a very similar conclusion. For the mortgage portfolio, which is a big part of our portfolios, is comforting.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, next up is another one that we get is just, again, the lifetime look back multiplier. Again, this is an optional tool that it's available to you. You do not have to use it, but Steve's going to explain to you why someone might use it, in their analysis. Steve?
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, but we continue to get questions from, all those auditors aren't coming on our coffee talks, Sean. We need to get them all in the coffee talk so we don't have to ask you guys separately. But invite them to our next coffee talk if they haven't been before. But so we have been getting we continually get questions about, what is that multiplier, and it's a part of the math because we want to separate the concepts of the look back period and the warm, right? The warm is a really important concept in CECL. No matter how you're calculating your reserve, what CECL demands of all of us, no matter your methodology, is that we're estimating losses over the remaining lives of the loans, over the warm period. And whereas a look back period is simply, well, when I'm estimating my potential future losses, my starting point is, well, what have my losses historically been over that warm period? Over let's say our warm is 5 years, and we want to estimate losses going forward over 5 years. So we look at what 5 years worth of losses were in the past, and that's our starting point, right? 5 years. However, does that mean we have to use 5 years of historical data? No. We could say, well, I want to use 10 years of historical data and still use that 10 years worth of look back data to figure out what 5 years worth of historical losses would look like. And so then we take that 5 years worth and we project that forward for our reserve calculation. So a practical application is, well, in this particular example, let's say that you have a 5-year warm on your mortgage portfolio, but over the last 5 years, you have sustained a grand total of $0 in net charge-offs on that mortgage portfolio. What does that mean? It means that your entire reserve has got to come from Q factors. And that can be a frustrating process, right? Justifying the reserve that that they're not going to accept anything less than, but you can't justify it based on your historical experience, at least over the last 5 years, because you haven't had any historical losses. And you might say, well, I had some losses back during the last credit cycle. It'd be great if I could go further back in time and capture some of those losses from, let's say, 10 years ago, so that my entire reserve didn't have to be justified from Q factors. That's exactly one of the primary purposes of us allowing this flexibility in the look back period. You can say, well, instead of just going back 5 years, I'll take the beginning of my look back period, bring it back to 2013, back when I did have a little bit of losses, and still use that 10-year period of data historically to calculate 5 years worth of losses. So how do we get from 10 years of data to 5 years of losses? Multiply it by 0.5, right? So 10 years. So there's, in this example, 32 basis points worth of total aggregate losses over the entire 10-year look back. But with a warm of 5, I'm going to multiply that by 0.5 or divide it by 2 and get 16 basis points worth of, it represents 5 years worth of losses. Since the warm is 5 years, that 16 basis points becomes a starting point for our projection of 5 years worth of anticipated losses moving forward. So that's kind of the simplest way to explain what the multiplier is. It's taking losses over a look back period and making them match your warm, so we can project that duration, that warm duration going forward. Sean?
Perfect. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, and again, I think just trying to give you some optionality and more flexibility if you're looking for that.
And we've got this, and we also we have a nice little, you don't have to try to come back and find this slide on this presentation if you have an auditor who wants to walk through it, or you're trying to explain what I just kind of explained to them. We have a nice little video clip in the helpful hints box right on the top of that page of the CECLSolver that pretty much goes through what I just went through in detail. So if your examiner says, great, explain it to me, send them that link, and they should be off and running. Perfect. And then tell them to join our next coffee talk.
There you go. Again, just, we do have, if you're ever being really questioned on trying to provide show your work on some of the analysis, this is an Excel tool that Steve built to kind of, lay out all the data and be able to show every step of the calculation. So Steve, I don't know how much you want to cover here, but
yeah, well, I do want to actually, I'm going to share it in Excel for a minute,
Yep.
just so you guys can see a bit
Yep.
of how the sausage is made. And that was the idea behind this, was the vast majority of our users do not have to download this, do not have to ask us for it, do not have to go through it. It's for the cases where you have an auditor or an examiner who's raking you over the coals, who, as much additional detail as you provide for the calculations is bound and determined to see every single value that goes into one of the calculations to satisfy their own comfort level or to further validate it. We did create an Excel-based auditing or validation tool that you request from us, and then we send it to you to match a particular scenario that you can then share with an auditor to get them off your back, so to speak. So let me go ahead and share briefly. If you haven't seen this work in Excel before, I'm going to show you how it works in Excel. Again, it's taking you through every single step. There's a lot of data in here. There had to be. I could simplify this, but then it wouldn't do its job. Right. So we have a raw data tab. This brings in every single piece of financial information directly from the call report, not manipulated in any way, not quarterlyized or whatever. It's all year-to-date financial data going all the way back to the beginning of time, with balances, charge-offs, and recoveries. Right. So that's the data that's requested on the call report. Just gross charge-offs, gross recoveries, and loan balances. Well, there's a lot of steps to go through between getting a year-to-date gross charge-off and a year-to-date gross recovery and turn them into quarterly net charge-off ratios that we can aggregate over multi-year periods to calculate a lifetime loss rate. All those intermediate steps are in the aptly named intermediate tab, where we go from that call report data. And you can see every single value here. There are no values other than call report values. Everything else is a formula that traces back to that call report value, right? So you can literally trace it all the way forward. So we have the old segmentation. It's a little bit more complicated for you guys, because I'm sure you all do remember quite fondly at the beginning of 2022 when they changed all the call report segmentation on us for the loan portfolio. So we have all the pre-2022 segments and all the post-2022 segments. But we're able to go from charge-offs and recoveries to net charge-offs, and then quarterly net charge-offs, and then net charge-off ratios. Those are all the intermediate steps. And the final product is, this is exactly what you see on your historical tab on the CECLSolver. Every single value here will match that value perfectly. So what you would do is, if this is something that you needed, again, certainly not something you need to do unless it's requested multiple times, a lot of times, by an auditor or an examiner. You'd ask us for it. We send you this file. You tell us what scenario you'd like us to audit, so to speak. We'll just type in the WARMs, and we will customize the look back periods to match what you have. And it will show you the lifetime loss rate, show you the WARM multiplier, or the look back, the multipliers. And again, all this data is linked through the intermediate back to the raw data. So, if I were to change a WARM to anything else, everything recalculates on the fly. If I go and change a look back period to be longer or shorter to match any customizations, everything is recalculated. So this is still something you have to sort of request on a one-off basis from us, and then let us know for what scenario. Maybe it's, your end of 2024 stuff that you're being audited on now that you need to go back to an older scenario. You can let us know. We can do it for an older scenario. That's not an issue. Sean?
Great. Thank you, Steve. Let me pop back the presentation up here. Okay, so then finally, just to kind of refresh on the industry trends. Steve does this every quarter. We gave a little sneak preview last month, but just kind of things we've seen from the first quarter call reports.
Yep. And so if we're looking at, we like to slice and dice that data by asset size and by region a little bit. And so we can see some trends and going up. I don't believe last time we didn't have the first quarter data in. So this is the first time we'll be sharing that with everybody. But we see total reserves to loans have ticked up a little bit. They've continued to tick up by marginal amounts over the last few quarters. Interestingly enough, this is in a little bit of opposition to commercial banks. What we have seen for commercial banks is especially small, well, all size commercial banks actually, is they have been seeing a kind of consistent slight decreases in reserves over the last since CECL was implemented, but credit unions have seen the opposite. I think that's because when CECL was initially implemented, was at beginning of 2023, so two years and a quarter ago. At this point, a lot of the focus was on the bigger national commercial type institutions and what impact that would have. And so there was more pressure on a lot of those larger commercial banks to increase their reserves as a result of CECL. And as a result, the commercial bank industry became somewhat, well, in hindsight, over-reserved compared to the losses, the asset quality situation that we were in. So we've seen, asset quality slightly deteriorate on a consistent basis over the last couple of years, but we were not seeing reserves go up. We were seeing reserves come down. So coverage ratios for commercial banks has been decreasing significantly over the last couple of years. Credit unions, on the other hand, have not seen that. Credit unions had a significantly less increase in average reserve levels upon implementation of CECL, but reserves for credit unions have continued to tick up since that point in opposition to commercial banks. So that's an interesting dichotomy there between community financial institutions on the commercial bank side versus the credit union side. But we saw again in the first quarter an additional slight uptick in reserves. This is something that we also pull from our Excel add-in tool. Again, that Excel add-in tool is available upon request for a fee from Quick Analytics. So if you like doing more of this type of analysis on peer credit unions than just what the CECLSolver can provide, we can give you a demo of and show you how the Excel add-in works. And you can pull pretty much anything you can imagine, any financial data point on any credit union or groups of credit unions or commercial banks, if you so desire, in the country, and update it and refresh it on a quarterly basis. I use that tool to pull this data here just to get an idea for delinquencies, right? What direction are delinquent loans for credit unions? And I used NCUA Peer Group 5, which has got about 1,200 or so credit unions in it, for 100 to 500 million in assets. To do that. And what we see is we like to look at things like delinquencies on a quarter to same quarter last year basis, so to speak. So if you look at first quarter of 23, median delinquencies, 36 basis points. A year later, first quarter of 24, up to 49. And then in the first quarter of this year, 56. So a pretty consistent, increase or deterioration, or I guess increase in delinquencies across the credit union industry over the last couple years. However, your reserves have increased sort of to match it, unlike commercial banks. So we thought that was an interesting trend. And if you like these types of analyses, please reach out to us. We're actively developing a lot more interactive tools specifically for credit unions to be able to visualize this type of data in a very user-friendly format. That's something that we'll be coming out with and being able to demo to you guys very soon, and we're really excited about that.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. Certainly go ahead and submit any final questions in the chat or the Q&A. Just a reminder, all these recordings and past presentations are able to be found on our YouTube channel. You can see the link at the bottom of this page. A couple of upcoming webinars in June. We have a lower cost double results for new household acquisition webinar on the 17th. And then Steve and I'll be back on June 27th for next month's edition of Coffee Talk. Let's see. I don't see any additional questions. Steve, any final words before we let everyone have their weekend?
No, nothing comes to mind unless somebody has something in the chat for us.
No, I think we just double check one last time. No, I think we're good. Thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us for today's Coffee Talk. We really appreciate your participation and your attendance. We'll look forward to seeing you next month. And if anything comes up in the interim, certainly don't hesitate to
Oh,
reach
you know
out.
what? I something I forgot that I should have mentioned, and I may have briefly suggested it in the past, but it's closer to fruition now, so I wanted to make sure I did share it. We are very close to being ready to offer completely customized peer group generation for you guys for the CECLSolver and for future analytical offerings to credit unions. But as you guys know, right now for your peer data, you're pretty much limited to the NCUA's 6 peer groups, and then maybe slicing it by region or limiting it by state. But you're stuck in those asset buckets, so to speak, and geographic buckets. But we've been rapidly building the ability for all of you to create completely custom peer groups based on any financial criteria you see fit to run against your CECLSolver to help with really accurate peer directional trends for things like Q factor justification and everything else. So we'll be sure to probably demo that maybe on the next coffee talk if it's ready to go. But we're excited about that also.
Yeah, and there was a final question in the chat just about the slides. Again, likely Monday afternoon, we will send out a link to the recording today and a copy of the slides. So if you need them sooner than that, Samantha, you can certainly just put your email in the text or the chat, and I'll send it out to you as well. But otherwise, we can look for you can look for that email in your inbox on Monday. All right. I think that's all I'm seeing. Let me give one last look. Again, appreciate your attendance and participation today. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk soon. Thanks so much. Bye now.
Thanks, everybody.